In this video, let's talk about the outsized importance of VO2 max workouts for masters runners who are trying to run faster times. As we get into our 40s and beyond, there's just a natural tendency for our running performances to get worse as the years go on. But not all aspects of our running deteriorate at the same rate. You'll notice that speed and VO2 max decrease at a much greater rate than our endurance does.
So you can see what I'm talking about in this chart, with the blue lines, which is your VO2 max, and the green lines, which is your peak sprint power, going down pretty quickly once you leave your late 30s. However, the efficiency lines, which is the red, goes down at a much slower rate. So essentially your efficiency is your ability to run at a certain pace given a certain amount of oxygen uptake.
So it's inevitable that people are going to lose some VO2 max as they get older. I'd argue that a lot of people are just giving away their fitness. And I guess what I mean by this is that there seems to be a hesitancy to do the intense VO2 max workouts. And I think it probably comes down to a couple of different factors. The one is that amongst a lot of serious runners, there's the mentality that the marathon is the king, that somehow the marathon is a more prestigious and more important event than, say, a 5K. And this is typically just true amongst more recreational runners. If you were to ask elite runners if it's more impressive to break, let's say, 20 minutes for a 5K or to go under 4 hours for a marathon, there's no doubt that they would say that the 5K is the superior performance. But that's probably not true amongst more recreational runners. I think the other aspect is that people are just afraid to be a little bit uncomfortable. And, like today when I was running, it's pretty comfortable run. My heart rate wasn't too high. My breathing was pretty easy. Wasn't a whole lot of pain. But to train for a 5K or to train for a mile, that requires some pain. It doesn't necessarily require as much mileage, but there is going to be some pain involved and you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone. And I think as people get older, they're more hesitant to do those kinds of workouts, which just sort of has a bit of a snowball effect where people aren't doing those workouts. So they get worse at those events, which makes them, again, even more hesitant to do that kind of work. But I think in both of these circumstances, a change in mentality can really fix things up. If you sort of accept the fact that you do need to do some faster VO2 type workouts and that it will help not just your 5K, but it'll also help your marathon. And we'll get into that as well. If you look at a typical marathon training block, it's going to have a lot of lactate threshold and marathon pace work, which don't get me wrong, it's super important stuff. But I think it acts differently than doing the VO2 max work. What I feel like the marathon pace and the lactate threshold work does best is it allows you to work for longer periods of time at paces that are approaching your VO2 max. So for instance, if you're doing a long marathon pace workout, it might be an hour and a half workout at 85% of your VO2 max pace, and that would be a tough workout. But notice that it's a percentage of your VO2 max. So there's ways that you can improve your marathon pace. Either you can run that same workout at 90% of your VO2 max, and that's a skill as well that you can work on, and you can do that through the marathon pace training work. But you could also have the same effect by increasing your VO2 max, right? If your VO2 max goes up by 5%, then you can continue to run at 85% of your VO2 max. The pace goes up, but your level of effort pretty much stays the same as opposed to running at a higher overall percentage of your VO2 max. So two different ways of increasing the pace for your marathon training, but just sort of coming at it at different approaches. And I think the standard way of doing it is to improve your ability to run long periods of time at at 85%, maybe 85% to 95% of your VO2 max. And that probably works well for younger athletes, but for older athletes where you're disproportionately seeing decreases in your VO2 max, it's probably more important to spend some time, and I'm not saying all of it, on improving your VO2 max and sometimes that's going to come at the cost of those marathon pace workouts. I mean, all these things are, are trade-offs, right? If you're gonna put some time and effort into doing VO2 max workouts, the biggest expense there is the opportunity cost of doing it, right? If you're spending one of your key workout sessions doing VO2 max workouts, then certainly you're going to have to leave something out, whether that's a long run or a lactate threshold workout or a VO2 max workout. And I think you just sort of have to experiment and see, which of those approaches works best for you. So let's look at a couple specific workouts that you could do. One way to approach it would just be to do a total VO2 max workout. And this really wouldn't look much different than if you were just to take, one day every 2 weeks, and you were to just take a stereotypical 5K or 10K workout. And that might look like something like 6 by 1 kilometer at your 5K pace, and maybe 2-3 minutes rest in there. You're going to be breathing pretty hard, and that's sort of the effect, right? That's the point of the VO2 max workout, is that you're training your body to take in more oxygen. And so to do that, you should expect that you're going to be breathing a lot heavier for this than you would be for some of your lactate threshold, or certainly your marathon pace workouts. Another approach you could do, and then maybe it's a little bit less of a commitment, would be to have a bit of a hybrid workout. Actually, I did a workout like this yesterday where I wasn't really wanting to totally commit to any one type of energy system, and so actually the workout for me was 4-mile tempo or lactate threshold. So for me that was at 5:30 pace, and then I took a 4-minute break, jogging at at like 10-minute pace, nice and easy for me. And then I did a 1-mile effort. For me, that was at 5-minute pace, which is probably a little bit faster than my 5K pace, but somewhere in that range. So that was really working the VO2 max. It's got 5 minutes of solid work in there, and then I took it a step further and did 4 by 400 at my mile pace. And so ambitiously, I don't know if I could do this, but I was running them in 67 seconds, those quarters. And so, kind of gave my body a chance to run at a multitude of different paces. In many ways, it was kind of a third of 3 different types of workouts, right? It was a third of a marathon workout, the 4-miler. It was a third of a 5K workout. Typically a good workout for me for a 5K would be 3 by 1 mile. And it was a third of a miler's workout. 400s at mile pace. You might, a good workout for a miler might be 3 sets of four 400s at mile pace, or maybe some faster stuff after doing 2 sets. But you get the idea that I wasn't sort of all in on any one type of energy system, but it sort of gave my body a chance to improve across the spectrum. One of the athletes that I think epitomizes the importance of this broad range of abilities is Sifan Hassan. To me, she was the most exciting athlete of the last Olympics. Being a medal threat in basically any event longer than 800 meters, she, just ran some amazing races on the track, and then came back and ran an equally amazing race in the marathon. And I think she views the 1500 and the 5000, her abilities in those events, as really being a complement to her marathon abilities. And I think most of us should take that mentality to heart, that even if your focus is on the marathon or the half marathon or longer events, that it's just super important to have that speed at the shorter distances. And it just makes those paces at the marathon or half marathon distances that much less taxing on your body. One of the other really interesting things about VO2 max work is not only does it help your running, but it has a really strong association with your lifespan. There's lots of really fascinating research that shows that improvements in VO2 max are as important to your health as quitting smoking. I'm going to dig into some of this research in some further videos, so subscribe if you're interested. But there's just some really fascinating stuff. It's not just about improving your your marathon time, your 5K time. This is about improving the quality of your life. And, you know, we'll get into it more later, but the fascinating part is that there's sort of, it works at all stages. So going from unfit to just moderately fit has a huge benefit. But it even has benefits of going from above average to elite level. Same thing. Like there are just huge lifespan benefits from moving from one phase to the other. So stick around, and we'll explore that in a later topic. Thanks a lot.
Let's go, Steven!